Hi, Dr. Johnson back with you again. Another session on the transformative power of virtue. This, believe it or not, is session 8, and I've entitled this, Virtue is Spiritual Life Power. You know, we generally think of virtues as an action, something that we perform. But is it only an action? Virtue can perhaps be best regarded as the power which allows the action to occur. It's power, it's God's energy. I believe, for example, that it was virtue that created the energy to make the Big Bang, which created and still is creating our whole universe. Virtue, then, is fundamentally the spiritual energy of truth, beauty, and goodness, if you can imagine that. Let me try to give you an example. Let's say that you're in a store, maybe a grocery store, and you're waiting online to get checked out, and you notice in the next aisle or the next register, here is a person who is letting another person get ahead of him or her because this other person seems to be in a hurry or maybe has some physical disability. And you recognize this action as an act of kindness. So in so doing, you're not only naming the action, you've witnessed something really much deeper. You have felt, I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but you've felt the power of the hand of God. What an exceptional result from just recognizing some, well, otherwise quite simple everyday action. But is this action random, or is it more intentional? The kind act you witnessed in the doing is the doing of the presence of God in this act of so-called kindness. Something deep inside of you has been moved. Now, you may not be consciously aware that that's going on, but it is. You've been touched by something sublime. You have experienced the divinity of God in you by just witnessing this act of kindness, which of course is a virtue. You spiritually recognize that this kindness is in that person. Again, this may not be intentional and may not even be conscious, but it's clearly there. The divinity of the virtue of kindness. The power tool of kindness has now warmed your heart, and your world is now a bit brighter. And you actually feel somewhat better, all in this little action that's there. So kindness can be seen as demonstrating gentle, affectionate, loving behaviors. Kindness can be being tender, mild, friendly, helpful. Kindness can be giving considerate care freely to someone else. Kindness may be acting with courteous gestures and goodwill. And the point is that all of this has been planted in your heart. Can you imagine that everyone actually has within them the virtue of kindness, but there are some people who seem more free to express it than others? What's going on here? What's the change? I'm sure that you have experienced the beautiful consequences when someone does show kindness to another. And it happens on three persons. It happens on the person who's receiving the kindness, in this case, the person who was led ahead on the line. It also happens in the person who's showing the kindness, who's practiced the virtue of kindness. And it's also happening in you because you witness this whole thing going on. So kindness is being sparked in the souls and the hearts and the minds of three people. But what allowed you to do this work and experience this elation that entered your heart? The answer is quite simple, and yet it's profound. You have cultivated kindness in your own soul. If you hadn't cultivated kindness in your own soul, you wouldn't have even seen this act of kindness. You wouldn't have given it any credence whatsoever, and consequently you wouldn't have felt the slight elation of heart that may have consequences for you, upon you in the whole day. God planted the virtue of kindness and all virtues in your heart, and it's activated by the power of the Holy Spirit that we call grace. But what if the other person did not show kindness, but rather showed the shadow of kindness, which is neglect, or even what we call the compulsion of kindness, which is sometimes called codependency or sometimes submissiveness. So if that person had showed, instead of kindness, had showed either the shadow or the compulsion of kindness, then what would you have felt witnessing that? Instead of warm feelings, you would see the opposite, probably disrespect, lack of attention, ignoring the needs of another, or even acting destructively towards another. What would this do to your day? It's certainly not going to make it better, is it? It's not going to make you feel any better, closer to God, closer to people. Actually, it was going to make you more protective. So what are the consequences of displaying, receiving, or even witnessing such behaviors? Well, how about these feelings? Might you get angry? Might you get upset? Might you feel devalued? Might you feel discounted, sad, hurt, disregarded, embarrassed, confused, overpowered, misunderstood, judged? Yeah, these are all negative feelings. When we don't show virtue, and when we don't witness virtue around us, these are the feelings that we're left with. Have you looked around these days? Do you think there's more anger, more frustration, more contention, more dislike, more disrespect? Well, you answer that question. You don't need me to answer it for you. And what might be the consequences on us with some of these feelings? Well, I think you see where we're going. It's not a good picture. Virtue, then, in all of its forms, whether it's received or practiced or simply witnessed, elevates our feeling. Virtue fosters peace and joy and empathy and more values within us individually, and an enhancement of goodwill between and among all of us collectively, as in the civic virtues that our founding fathers said, democracy is going to fail without these. So when virtue is not shown, when it is not used, when the shadow or the compulsion of the virtue is shown, then the consequences are the opposite. And what happens to all of us? We and everyone around us suffers without virtue. Think about this. God bless you. We'll see you next time for session number 9.